Spring of 1852 in Natchez, Mississippi. Within 2 weeks, 6 members of the Whitfield household collapsed after supper, each struck with the same sequence: sudden cramping, blackened lips, fever, and sleepless nights ending in decline. The pattern was precise: always after the evening meal, always within the same narrow hours. Official records filed it under seasonal illness, yet a physician's margin notes tie every episode to the supper table, the time written plainly beside each name. A single survivor remained inside that dining room, the housemaid who plated every dish, carried each tray, and cleared the table once the bell was rung. For more than 120 years, the truth was avoided, the files sealed, the ledger pages never read aloud. Before we go any further, I want to ask you, where are you watching from? And what hour is it over there right now? Leave your answer in the comments below. And while you are here with us, make sure you subscribe to X Archives so these accounts, sealed, buried, and almost forgotten, can be opened again. The first surviving record comes not from the family itself, but from a physician's casebook dated October 12, 1856. The page sits in the middle of a thick volume bound in calfskin, the ink still dark and sharp where the doctor wrote in steady lines. It begins with the planter's name, his age, and a description of recurring pains that struck most often at night. The casebook states the man rose from the table in discomfort, sometimes unable to walk a straight line across the room, yet showed relief after several days away from his plantation. The phrasing is restrained, clinical, and exacting. Episodes after supper, progressive weakness, symptoms abate upon travel. The physician notes that the condition did not resemble the seasonal fevers sweeping other parts of Louisiana that year. There were no rashes, no spreading to the family members who dined with him, and no evidence of contagion among the servants. Meals, however, are mentioned repeatedly. The doctor writes that the planter's discomfort appeared following ingestion, and that time of onset averaged 1 to 2 hours after supper. Each note ties the sickness to the rhythm of the household dining room rather than to the air or water. The handwriting is careful but grows firmer in the margins. One line, underlined twice, reads simply, "domestic in origin." That phrase stands apart from the otherwise neutral phrasing of the entry, carrying a weight the physician did not expand upon. No cause is named, but the implication is visible even now. Whatever troubled the man belonged to his home. The casebook also preserves small details that fix the condition within the house's routine. The doctor records the hour the supper bell rang, the dishes set before the family, and the times at which complaints were first voiced. These notes show a household run by precision, bells, schedules, and fixed menus, and a patient who grew sick only when inside that pattern. The trips he took into New Orleans are written in a lighter hand, accompanied by the words, "no symptom." He ate in taverns and inns during these absences, and the doctor confirms that he appeared sound of digestion. The contrast between health in town and illness at home is marked clearly by the ink itself. There is also a second entry, written in the same month, that adds, "no sign of contagion." It is as though the physician sought to rule out the simplest explanations first. He specifies that neither the wife nor the children showed any complaint. The enslaved workers in close proximity were also described as without fever or pallor. By eliminating what it was not, the physician was left with what he could not name directly. That October page closes with a brief summary. Symptoms persistent, yet confined. Source unresolved. The last stroke of ink is heavier than the rest. In the margin, the physician underlines the hour after supper again and again, as if to fix the reader's eye on the timing above all else. It is this single detail, the clock hand's position after the evening meal, that will point forward toward the records of the household rota and the names written on it. Pinned to the pantry wall with an iron tack is a sheet of paper marked by grease and soot. It is a duty rota dated in ink, listing the names of servants and the hours attached to their labor. The writing is in the overseer's hand, the columns neat, the edges rubbed from years of reference. Each bell in the household corresponds to a task on that rota, and each task corresponds to a person. Etta's name appears more often than the others, the strokes darker where it has been rewritten across the months. The house itself was arranged by routine, not chance. A bell hung in the dining room, another in the parlor, one near the master's study, and one at the side of the house for outdoor summons. Each bell led by cord to the pantry, where a servant was meant to wait for its sound. Etta's post was the scullery, a narrow space with one window half-shuttered, from which she moved along the same route each day, fire to stove, stove to sideboard, sideboard to table. The rota shows her name tied to each of those movements. The pantry doorframe carried hooks where keys were hung on labeled tags. There were keys for the wine, the flour bins, the larder, and the store of imported spices. These keys were passed down from overseer to maid in a sequence meant to leave no gap in accountability. Etta's signature task was to collect the keys at dusk and return them at the close of service. The stains on the rota align with these duties, dark rings where damp fingers touched the sheet after handling iron and brass. The master's table was served by a fixed rhythm. Meals were plated in the pantry, carried to the sideboard in the dining room, and then presented in sequence. Etta's position was at the crossing point of this chain. She stood between the fire that prepared, the sideboard that displayed, and the table that consumed. The rota does not name her role in elaborate words, it simply repeats service beside her name. Yet it is clear from repetition alone that her presence was indispensable. What the physician called domestic in origin is seen here as structural. No plate reached the table without Etta's hands. No wine was poured without the keys she carried. The rota shows no allowance for absence, no substitution by another hand. When she fell ill or was delayed, entries in the margins mark fines and rebukes. Even her briefest absence had to be justified on paper. The household lived by paper, bells, and keys, and she was bound inside that system. At the bottom of the sheet, a later hand made revisions. Lines were drawn through other names, leaving only hers to cover the core duties. What began as a division of labor tightened into reliance on a single figure. In this way, the routine concentrated into one route, one pair of hands, and one set of footsteps repeating day after day. By the end of that autumn, the rota was amended again. Where once tasks rotated among 3 or 4 names, the new sheet shows Etta present for every plate carried to the master's place at the table. The ink is darker, the assignment absolute. It is this shift, the full weight of service resting on one person, that will mark the punishment to come. The proof of what changed that week is written on a single page in the household accounts. It is headed, Provisions, Kitchen, with neat lines for flour, lard, salt pork, coffee, and sugar. A column that had held steady through summer falls suddenly in October. The entry reads, in the overseer's hand, Reduce kitchen hands by 1/2 ration. The note is initialed and dated. Beneath it, a smaller line appears. No tasting at stove. The ink is darker there, as if the pen pressed harder to make the rule plain. The change did not begin at the ledger. It began in the dining room. Guests were present. The parlor clock was loud. The bell was rung twice for emphasis. When the soup was placed on the sideboard, the master spoke so that the room could hear it. He said service would be swift, and that no servant would touch food until the table was finished. The butler's face stayed forward. Etta stood at the crossing point between pantry and table, trays balanced, eyes on the rim of the tureen. The order was not unusual in tone, but it was new in reach. The rule, no tasting, moved from custom to command. The market book for that same week shows smaller purchases. Where 5 pounds had been standard for the kitchen staff, 3 appear, then 2.5. Coffee is cut. Sugar is marked, reserve for family only. A side note in pencil says, Scraps return to scullery at close. The pattern strips calories first, dignity next. The pen leaves no rhetoric, only numbers, ticks, and initials that carry the same weight as a voice raised at the table. Several guests later remarked, in letters to their families, on the sharpness of the evening. The table was heavy with meat and bread. The plates were full and refilled. Service moved in a narrow arc, scullery to sideboard, sideboard to the master's hand, and Etta was the pivot. Her work did not slow. The rota from Chapter 2 had already coded. concentrated service onto her. Now the account page narrowed what she was permitted to take in while doing it. The household's own paper made the punishment official. The physician's casebook adds its quiet line to the same week. The entry follows a house visit 2 days after the dinner. The phrasing is plain: complaints by night, profuse perspiration, weakness on rising. There is no color to the sentence beyond the symptoms themselves. The doctor does not mention any change in the kitchen or the ledger cuts. He would not have known to. He records only what he can observe: timing, effect, and the absence of fever in anyone else. Back inside the house, routine tightened. The sideboard cloth was checked for stains after each course. The overseer stood once in the doorway to the pantry with the accounts still open in his hand. He did not need to speak. The page had already spoken. Etta continued the route that the rota set: fire to stove, stove to sideboard, sideboard to table, and then back again with the empties. Between courses she waited near the bell cords, listening for the pull that would bring her forward. In the accounts, another note appears by week's end: bones boiled twice. The intention is economy, not nutrition. On the opposite page, the wine tally rises by 4 bottles, then 5. The table's abundance and the scullery's scarcity are recorded in the same ink. The practice of cutting rations while increasing display is not uncommon in such houses. What matters here is that it begins exactly when the doctor's notebook first uses the phrase, by night. The chapter closes on the doctor's marginalia. Under the date, he adds 2 words that had not appeared before in the case: night sweats. He underlines the hour after supper with a single stroke, the same mark seen on the earlier page. That line will lead directly to the map of repeated habits: the menus, the fix, ed seat, the demand for the usual that waits in the next record. The butler kept a small stack of menu cards in the bottom drawer of his sideboard. Most were clean and folded, written in the same careful hand: soup, fish, roast, vegetables, dessert. One card, however, carries the house's story more plainly than any ledger. It is grease-spotted, the corners softened, and along the top edge a line of pencil dates runs from autumn into the following spring. Every time the family repeated a service, the butler marked the day and tucked the card back under the linen. The pattern that the physician suspected is legible here in ink, oil, and habit. Seating did not change. The master sat at the head, his wife to his right, the eldest son opposite, and guests placed according to rank and distance traveled. Chairs were never swapped. The cutlery lay in the same order. The bell pulled once to begin and twice to hurry. Etta's route did not vary: scullery to stove, stove to sideboard, sideboard to table, then back again with the empties. The path she wore across the floorboards shows faint polish where her feet turned the same corners night after night. The card lists each course and the order of presentation. Beside one dish, a faint notation appears again and again: second help. A later hand adds, per request. When the master lifted his head at the end of the first serving, the butler took it as signal, and Etta returned to the pantry to plate the same dish again. Even on nights when guests urged him to try something else, he waved the suggestion aside and asked for the usual. The card's pencil ticks count those seconds as if they were tallies on a wall. Habit marked the table in smaller ways, too. The master salted twice, once when the plate arrived and again after the first mouthful. He drank before cutting the meat. He pushed aside the vegetable that did not please him and drew the favorite dish nearer to the knife. None of this was unusual. All for a man of his rank. It is only notable because it was fixed, unbending, and recorded. Where the earlier chapter showed punishment laid out in accounts, this one shows appetite arranged by ritual. The ritual does not shout, but it repeats. On the back of the card, the butler kept brief notes of evenings when the order shifted. Guests arriving late, a storm delaying the roast, a substitute dish sent from the kitchen when the market failed. On those nights, the pencil marks for second help are absent, and in the physician's casebook the following morning's complaints are either soft or not present at all. When the full, familiar order returned, so did the heavier notes in the doctor's hand. These quiet correspondences read like a ledger shared between rooms that never spoke to each other directly. Etta's presence sits at the center of this pattern. The rota from the pantry wall already placed her at every stage of service. The card confirms that she alone carried the favored plate across the threshold twice. She did it with the same careful movements each time, cloth set, plate centered, knife aligned with the edge. The stains that darken the card near the favored dish were made by hands that had just lifted it from the stove. The butler's pencil rides those stains like a second testimony. What is not written is noise or quarrel. The house did not argue with its own routine, it obeyed it. That is why the card speaks so clearly. In a line of dates and identical courses, the master's insistence on the usual becomes not taste but timetable. And in a column of physician entries that refer only to hour and effect, the timetable becomes the nearest thing to cause that the records will allow. By the last penciled date on the card, the family has stopped entertaining, the seating remains fixed, the bell still rings, and Etta's route does not change. The favored dish continues to be requested twice. When the physician underlined the hour after supper in his casebook, he was, without knowing it, underlining this card as well. The symptoms rise and fall with the nights when the usual is served and served again, especially on Sundays, when the table is fullest and the pencil dates run closest together. The parlor guest book carries the trace of a full year in narrow lines of ink. Sundays have their own look, more names, neat flourishes, the word supper written by the butler beside the date. Between those entries, the physician's daybook supplies a parallel rhythm, brief notes set down on Monday mornings, each marked by the same observation: discomfort in the night, weakness on rising, appetite low. Arranged side by side, the two books speak to one another without sharing a room. The year begins with early spring company. Church bells mark the afternoon. Neighbors arrive after evening service for bread, roast, and coffee. The guest book shows who came and at what hour they left. The planter sits where he always sits. The sequence of courses follows the card in the butler's drawer. Near midnight, the physician notes a restless patient and adds, "complaints post-supper." The next Sunday, a similar arc repeats. Full table, late departure, and on Monday, the same short line. Night discomfort, perspiration. By June, the house attributes the pattern to heat. The wife uses that word in letters to a cousin, and the butler writes "summer fever" in pencil beside 3 Sunday entries. The family explains the weakness as a seasonal thing. Too much rich food, too little air moving through the hall. Windows are opened wider, fans are brought from storage. The guest list does not shrink. The physician does not record opinions about weather. He writes only the hour and the effect. In July, his notation adds "no contagion observed," a phrase he had used in October and resumes again now. There are Sundays when the table is quiet because the planter dines elsewhere. The guest book leaves an empty line, and on those nights the coach is recorded as sent to a neighbor's house across the parish boundary. The following morning, the daybook contains a different kind of line. Sound of digest, in or no entry at all. A week later, the pattern returns with company at home, inked names in the parlor book, complaints after midnight in the doctor's hand. The contrast does not need the physician to point at it. The 2 columns make it clear. Guests come and go. Some write their full names and counties. Others sign with initials. The hours show a habit of lingering, coffee after dessert, a pipe on the gallery, a second helping for those who stay late. Etta's movement is not entered here by name, but the service it implies is plain. More plates lifted, coffee poured again, cutlery cleared and reset. When the parlor book shows a crowded Sunday, the daybook most often shows a restless night. On weeks when the family keeps to itself, the physician's pages are spare. In late summer, the household tries variations. The butler moves dessert sooner, serves wine later, and shortens the intervals between courses. The guest book records no complaint from those seated. The physician's notes the next mornings remain consistent. Night sweats, weak on rising, complaints after supper. He does not vary his words because the hours do not vary their meaning. The books together fix the pattern as if they were two halves of one ledger. Autumn brings a return of larger company after harvest. The handwriting grows darker where more callers sign. The same Sundays with a full table yield the same Monday lines in the daybook. In the space where one might expect cause to be written, there is only time, the hour the bell rang, the hour the discomfort began, the hour the coach was called for those who lingered too long. Over the year, this becomes the form of the story, names in the parlor, symptoms in the ledger, and nothing in between but custom. By winter's end, the butler has added a small practice. He writes, "home table" beside the busiest Sundays. The physician's pages mirror those dates with the same clipped notes. When the planter eats away from home, the daybook is quiet. When he eats at home on the familiar schedule, the daybook is not. The household continues to call it heat or richness, as if weather and fat could keep to the clock so faithfully. The record does not argue, it only draws a line from bell to bed and sets it down again and again. No episode followed the neighbor's table. The monthly account book grows heavier by a set of slips pinned to its March page. They are apothecary receipts from a shop off Chartres Street, each one listing camphor spirits, smelling salts, and tonics for the nerves. The totals climb from early spring into summer, the figures rounded by a practiced hand. On the ledger margin, the overseer writes, "For rooms, airing," as if the air itself could be treated and paid for like flour or coal. The receipts, flattened under the tack, give the house's answer to a problem it will not name. Windows are opened from breakfast to dusk. Linen curtains are looped back with twine. The dining room sash sticks in the heat and is forced up with a knife blade, leaving a notch in the paint. Bowls of camphor are set on mantels and sideboards. Their sharp scent settles over the carpets and into the stairwell. The butler records rooms prepared on 2 Sundays when company is expected, and the parlor book shows the usual names arriving after church. The physician's daybook follows with the familiar line on Monday mornings, complaints in the night, perspiration, weakness on rising. The house alters its atmosphere and the pattern does not move. In June, a display is made. 2 neighbors are present, and the master orders a cleanliness inspection of the servants. It is performed in the open doorway of the pantry, not in the yard where real work is usually judged. Hands are checked, aprons are sniffed, heads are turned toward the light to look for dust. The butler holds the account book under his arm, like a certificate of propriety. No one is dismissed. The neighbors leave satisfied enough to sign the guest book with a flourish. In the physician's notes the next day, the same Monday sentence appears. The receipts continue through July and August. More camphor, purifying salts, a bottle labeled simply drops. The account line for the Appalachian. Akari now rivals meat and coffee. On the opposite page, the household cuts small items for the kitchen staff and marks savings, summer. The balance of the month can be read in the opposing inks. Money for the air, less for the hands that move it. Etta's name does not appear in these pages, but the rota from the pantry wall has not changed. Her route still crosses every plate. Travel brings a pause. A small itinerary, folded into the back of the account book, lists a steamer to town and 2 nights in a hotel near the river. A ticket stub bears the date. In this same span, the physician's daybook is clear or carries only routine entries for other patients. He writes "sound" on the date of the planter's return. The word does not hold. Within 3 days, the account resumes its apothecary pins, and the margins resume their notes on room airing and bowls refilled. By September, the household adds fans to doorways and leaves the pantry window open while service is underway. The smell of camphor mixes with the roast in the bread. Guests remark on the freshness. The parlor book shows longer stays on Sundays when the air moves. The physician's notes ignore the commendation and keep to the hours: discomfort after supper, poor sleep, pallor in the morning. In October, the receipts are so many that the overseer binds them with twine before pinning them to the page. A second trip into town is tried in November. The itinerary lists one overnight only. The physician marks stable upon return. That evening the coach is heard on the gravel. The trunk is carried inside. The keys are taken down from their hooks and returned to their tags. Supper is served on the familiar schedule. The ledger of the body answers more quickly this time. Before dawn, the doctor writes a line that needs no flourish. The hours at home have reclaimed their effect, and before winter begins, the household will too. Another remedy, not for the air but for proximity. Locks and keys come next. The butler's book records the change before anyone speaks of it aloud. On a fresh page headed Keys Plate, 3 new tag numbers appear in a column: W12 for the wine press, L7 for the larder, P3 for the pantry hatch. Each tag is described by shape and metal: 2 brass ovals, 1 iron disc, and each is paired with a date from late November. Beside them, in the butler's hand, are the names of those allowed to touch them. The list is short. Etta's name is not struck out. It is placed under receive, return, not hold. The wine is moved first. Bottles once kept on a lower shelf of the sideboard are transferred to a locked closet, and the key for W12 hangs on the inner hook of the butler's waistcoat during service. The book notes the hour he takes it down and the hour he puts it back. When the bell sounds for the first course, he unlocks the closet, measures, pours, relocks. The routine adds steps, but not uncertainty. The glasses still reach the table at the same moment, and the master's hand still finds the stem without looking. Next, plating is separated. The book records a change from pantry plating to scullery plate-up for first course, pantry finish for second. A line is drawn to show a new position at the threshold: a scullion boy, hired to stand between. His name is written once and underlined. He is to carry dishes from scullery to pantry so that no one set of hands crosses both spaces. The pages describe it as a separation of stations, as if changing rooms could change appetite. The larder receives a new lock. The tag L7 is tested twice a day, and the test times are written in careful digits, morning and afternoon. The pantry hatch that leads to the side yard is fitted with a bolt. Its tag P3 is noted as kept by butler in view of overseer. Hooks on the pantry doorframe fill with labeled ovals, clinking when the door moves. Each sound reads like prow. Oof to those who want evidence of control. During service, the choreography grows more exacting. Etta lifts from fire to stove as before, but now hands the plate to the scullion at the pantry threshold. He carries it to the sideboard, where the butler inspects and gestures toward the table. The route breaks into 3 legs instead of 2. The feet that walk them multiply. Yet the card in the sideboard drawer, soup, fish, roast, vegetables, dessert, does not change its order, and the master's seat does not change its place at the head. The favored dish remains in the middle of the sequence. When it arrives, the master salts twice, tastes, and asks for the usual second helping. The scullion is sent back along the new path, sideboard to pantry, pantry to scullery, while Etta moves from stove to threshold with the next plate already in her hands. The butler's book notes only that service is brisk. The physician's daybook notes the same hours as before the changes, and his language remains plain: complaints by night. More keys are cut. The page that began with 3 tags grows to 6, then 8. A notation appears: tested in presence of master, and, lower down, wine poured in view. The measures are described as safeguards, but the effect is theatrical. Guests watch the unlocking and nod. The book registers their nods, as if approval were a seal. No one writes the simplest truth, that the table still looks the same from the head of it, and the same request still leaves the master's mouth when the first helping is done. By week's end, the margin of the butler's page carries a single word written larger than the rest. It is underlined once, as if the pen paused to choose emphasis. The word is routine. Beneath it, a small arrow points to the column of hours. The house has multiplied keys and hands, but it has not altered the clock. The physician's letters will make that point with more caution and more distance, and they begin next. The correspondence sits in a narrow bundle tied with twine, each letter folded into itself and dated by month. The first is addressed from town to parish, the seal impressed with a small laurel. It opens in formal terms and proceeds in measured lines. Observations of night discomfort, intervals 1 to 2 hours post-supper, and the absence of similar symptoms among wife, children, and staff. In the margin, a brief notation appears: Sunday, abundant, as if the writer were reminding himself when the table was fullest. The body of the letter keeps to what can be defended by witness and interval. A closing line, underlined once, reads, "No evidence of miasma." Replies follow from 2 colleagues who have never seen the house. They ask for clocks, meal times, and travel dates. One writes the phrase "exposure domestic" in Latin and underlines it. Another requests detail on bedding and ventilation and receives, weeks later, a neat answer listing window positions and the number of bowls of camphor set on mantels. The exchange remains committed to hours and location, never to cause. Where an opinion threatens to appear, the pen returns to the same facts. After supper, not abroad, no spread. A letter to the family adopts courtesy, but keeps the same stance. It avoids speculation and cites only the daybook. Episodes recur at home. Relief upon travel. No contagion in household. The physician asks that menus be fixed to paper for a fortnight, and that seating remain constant for purposes of observation. In the margin he writes, "Sundays crowded." He does not accuse the table. He records its weight. A second note at the foot reads simply, "Observe without alarm." Through summer, the bundle thickens. A colleague in New Orleans proposes nervous complaint and suggests airings. The physician replies, "Measures attempted," then lists open shutters and receipts for camphor. Another asks whether the well has been examined. The answer comes with a date and a single sentence. Drawn and tested, no change. Now and then the physician copies a few words from the patient himself, never more than a line, and never as quotation. Weakness on rising, trouble in the night. He resists turning the man's remarks into a narrative and files them instead as recurring notes beside the hour. Autumn letters adopt a more procedural tone. The physician sets out a table of times: bell for supper, first course, second course, coffee, and places beside them the typical onset of discomfort. In 2 places he writes "late Sunday" and draws a small tick. The colleagues answer in the same manner, one using the phrase "pattern within domicile," the other, more cautious, "source not atmospheric." No one names a substance, no one names a hand. The language keeps circling the same 2 points, a clock and a room. The household, through the butler, provides the requested menus and the set places. The physician copies them and encloses duplicates, asking that his correspondence mark any relevant coincidence. In his margin, next to the favored dish, there is no accusation, only a small dot and the word "extra." On nights when the order shifts, weather, absence, a delayed course, his following day's letters grow shorter or do not appear. When the order is strict, the letters resume with their clipped lines. Taken together, they read like a ledger in another hand. By winter's edge, the physician's tone hardens, not toward blame, but toward process. He writes that measures of air and separation have failed to move the hours. He appends a simple list: open windows, camphor, plate separation, new keys, added staff. A colleague responds with 5 words: "not the air, not abroad." The physician recopies that phrase to his own file and brackets it. The final letter in the bundle is the least elaborate. It carries no discussion of humors, no reference to weather. It mentions recurrence after supper, absence when away, and no second case in household. Beneath these lines, alone on the page, the physician writes, "Inspection requested, Sheriff." He folds the sheet, ties it with the others, and turns to the next step. The inspection begins on paper. A single sheet bears the parish stamp in purple wax and a heading written in block letters, "Household Examination, Kitchen Adjoining Rooms." Below it, the sheriff's clerk rules 3 columns, item, count, remarks, and leaves a wide margin for notes. The first line reads, "Ladle, iron, long handle, 6, numbered." A second follows, "Pot, copper, large, 3, dented rims." By the end of the first hour, the page is half filled with cookware and numbers, every vessel reduced to a count and a condition. They start at the scullery. Buckets are tipped and set to drain. The sink is scrubbed while the clerk watches, then marked clear. In the pantry, the sheriff holds each ladle to the light, squints along its bowl, and instructs the clerk to strike a small mark into the handle with a nail. 2, 3. The list grows in order. Skillet, iron. 4. Kettle, tin. 2. Strainer. 1. Serving spoon, silver. 8. The tone is procedural. The pace is steady. No one is accused. Everything is counted. The well in the side yard is examined next. A line on the sheet becomes well, stone-lined, depth measured. A bucket is drawn, poured into a basin, and sniffed by the sheriff, then by the clerk. The word clear appears again in the remarks, followed by no visible matter. The inspection of salt is no more complex. The lid is lifted, grains are pinched and smelled, the lid replaced. The clerk writes, "Salt, coarse, 1 cask, dry." It is performance as much as inquiry, but it leaves a paper trail that says the rooms were not ignored. Back inside, shelves are measured, hinges noted, and the pantry hatch opened and shut 3 times under the sheriff's eye. Keys are produced on their labeled ovals and returned in view, as the butler's book had once described. The clerk copies tag numbers into the margin, W12, L7, P3, and sets a small dot beside each. When asked to sign, "How the new scullion station," the butler points to the threshold, and the clerk writes, "Position, between rooms." The entry is precise and empty of meaning beyond its location. The list becomes granular. Plate, ceramic, white, 24. Hairline crack, 2. Cup, porcelain, 14. Mismatched, 3. Knife, table, 12. Sharpened. Fork, 12. Straight. Each count is read back aloud before the sheriff initials the line. A second stamped sheet is started when the first grows crowded. The stamping, repeated, makes the inspection feel official even when the findings are ordinary. The sheriff's face remains neutral. He moves as if this is work done 100 times the same way. At intervals, he asks for times. "Hour of supper bell," the clerk copies. "Order of courses," on the next line. "Custom for seconds," on the next. In the margin of the first sheet, the sheriff writes a single word, routine. He underlines it once. When Etta demonstrates the path from stove to threshold, the clerk traces it on the page with a blunt pencil, a small U that touches scullery, pantry, sideboard, then back. The drawing looks simple until one remembers how often it is walked. The sheriff stands in the doorway during service practice and watches plates move with no food upon them. He counts the steps, checks that the scullion relays as instructed, and has the butler open and relock the wine closet in view. The clerk writes, "Observed in presence." No article is seized. Nothing is removed from its place. When the inspection finally reaches the dining room, the sheriff sits in the master's chair and sees what the master sees. The same path, the same sideboard, the same place where a favored dish would sit within reach. He nods once, not at discovery, but at familiarity. The report is assembled on the table before anyone leaves. Items are totaled at the bottom, pots, pans, knives, plates, and the well is declared sound. A short paragraph is added. Premises orderly, Keys accounted for, service observed. Then the sheriff turns to the margin and draws 2 more lines beneath the first, so the word there is marked 3 times. Routine. He signs the sheet and stamps it. The copies go to the physician and the family. The next action will not bring outsiders through the doors. It will shrink the circle instead and close ranks around the table that remains. The parlor guest book shows the change first. Pages that once carried neat lines of Sunday callers now hold a blank run that stretches from late winter into early summer. The butler, who had made a habit of adding supper beside the busiest entries, leaves those spaces untouched. A penciled dash appears where names would have gone, then nothing at all. When a cousin stops by in April, his is the only signature for the month, and the hour of departure is early. The house that had been open to company folds back on itself. With callers gone, the table shrinks. Leaves are lifted from the ends and carried to the sideboard. 2 chairs are removed to the hall. Service is set for kin only. The master at the head, his wife at the right hand, the eldest son opposite, and the younger children when they are allowed to sit. The bell still rings once to begin and twice to hurry, but it sounds softer against the smaller gathering. The menu card does not change order: soup, fish, roast, vegetables, dessert, but the pace loses the show of display. Without guests, there is no performance to measure. Etta's work does not alter with the room's size. Her route remains fire to stove, stove to sideboard, sideboard to table, then back again with the empties. The rota on the pantry wall still assigns her each critical link in the chain. Keys move from hook to hand and back again. Plates cross the threshold the same way they did when the parlor was full. Only the number of plates has fallen. If anything, the smaller table makes the rhythm more exact. There is less noise to cover mistakes, and less movement to diffuse attention. The master's condition now follows a single choice. On evenings when he keeps to a modest serving and lets the course pass without comment, the night is quiet and the following morning brings only fatigue. On evenings when he lifts his head at the end of the first portio, and asks for what he always asks for, the hours after supper take their familiar shape: restlessness, sweating, weakness on rising. Nothing else in the house's routine explains the difference. Windows have been opened in both cases. Keys have been watched. A scullion has stood between rooms. Wine has been poured in view. The only variable that matches the physician's daybook is the insistence on the usual. The butler's private notes, kept on the back of the menu card as before, reflect the narrowing field. Where he had once marked second help beside a favored dish with a pencil tick, he now adds house alone when the table is family only. The doctor's daybook, set against those dates, is steady in its language. He writes complaints by night after the second helping appears on the card and writes nothing on the mornings after it does not. No method sits on the page to be named. The record reads appetite, hour, effect. By late spring, travel stops entirely. The small itinerary that had twice interrupted the pattern remains unused in the account book's pocket. Trunks gather dust in an upstairs closet. The physician, who had once seen relief in town, records no such interval. The house becomes a closed system. Meals prepared within, eaten within, endured within. The sheriff's inspection has produced a list and a stamp, not an answer. Locks have multiplied. Hands have been added to stand between. The map of steps on the kitchen floor is unchanged. What shifts is who sees it. Without guests, there are fewer eyes to praise the unlocked display or to nod at the keys. The wife watches the master place his hand on the favored dish. The eldest son, now seated nearer the head to fill a space, looks at the sideboard with the same calculation the butler once reserved for company. Etta stands where she has always stood, at the crossing point, and waits for the bell or the glay, that sends her forward. The room knows what the physician's letters have stated in cautious terms. The hours answer to the table, and the table answers to one man's habit. In June, the physician proposes a controlled service night. He writes his plan on a folded sheet. Courses delayed, plates swapped, service rotated through different hands, the favored request anticipated and measured by the clock. The note is placed on the mantel in the study to await the master's consent. The parlor book remains open on its blank page. The house holds its breath for the evening when order itself will be tested and written down. The physician opens a fresh folio and rules a narrow column for times. He writes the date, the household name, and the words, "controlled service." Beneath that, he notes the positions of those present: master at head, wife at right, eldest son opposite, butler at sideboard, scullion at threshold, Etta at stove and pantry pass. No opinion appears on the page, only places, hours, and what is seen. 10 p.m. The supper bell rings once. Doors to the gallery stand open. The physician records ventilation ample. Keys are displayed on their labeled ovals, W12, L7, P3, and kept by the butler in view. Service is to be slower than custom by prior agreement. 15. First course plated in pantry, carried by scullion. Etta remains behind the threshold. Plates are swapped at the sideboard before reaching the table. The physician writes, "Swap AB." No remark is made at the head of the table. 32. Second course delayed by 5 minutes. The butler sends the scullion to fetch. Etta waits until signaled and passes the dish across. Again the sideboard receives and swaps. Swap BC. The physician's line for condition reads, "No change." 48. The favored dish is prepared in its place in the sequence. The physician asks for a rotation. Etta to pass to scullion, scullion to butler, butler to table. The notation reads rotation 1. The master salts twice, tastes, and keeps his place. The hour column is clean. The observation column is empty but for accepted, Dow 02. Second, helping withheld by plan. The butler offers a substitute. The master lifts his hand and asks for the dish by name. The physician writes the 2 words in quotes, under 10 letters, then draws a short line to the time. The butler defers, glances to the physician, and signals the rotation again. Second, help, per request. Day 19. Coffee is advanced early, a tactic tried in year 2. The physician notes, coffee early, and record. Is the master's refusal to rise. Seating remains fixed. Window positions unchanged. The column for condition reads, well. 5. A brief recess in service. The physician walks the pantry, watches the pass, and returns to his chair against the wall. Etta stands in her place, hands still, eyes on the sideboard. The rota hanging by the hooks carries her name as it did in autumn. The physician marks a small dot beside it in his book without comment. 21. Dessert delayed by 10 minutes. The master grows impatient and asks again for the same dish by name. The physician writes the time and the quoted word once more, then underlines neither. The butler complies. The scullion carries empty plates away. Etta passes a fresh serving along the same arc. The hour column turns neat and tight at 10. Family retires to the parlor. The physician remains in the dining room with his notebook. He writes, interval, calm. The house is quiet. Keys are rehung in view, counted aloud, and recorded as replaced. No disturbance. 10:07. First remark in the condition column, unease. The word stands alone. The physician does not attach cause. He notes temperature of the room, window position, and the sound of the gallery door as air moves. Dawn 12. Second remark, perspiration. The physician writes the pulse rate and the hour, then adds, refuses bed. He does not change his seat or his tone. The wife sends for a cloth. The eldest son goes upstairs without speaking. 2:03 a.m. Rising weakness. The words are the same he has used before. He adds, no second case. He waits, records the minutes, and watches the house hold to its places. Butler at sideboard, Etta at pass, scullion at door. 17. The physician closes the observational column with sequence confirmed. He brackets 3 features on the page: the request by name, the hour after supper, the absence of any similar complaint in others present. He does not write further. At dawn, he rules a final line across the folio and sets down the conclusion in the smallest script on the page. Pattern proven within the house. He dates it, caps his pen, and folds the notes. What comes next will not be a change to service or to keys, but a paper falling from a folded cloth, something hidden among linen that bears the times, the portions, and the same clean handwriting that the household sees every night and never reads. It happens while the pantry shelves are being stripped for washing. Tablecloths are lifted from the stack and shaken near the open window. From the fold of a damask runner, a flat packet slips and lands on the scrubbed board. It is no larger than a palm and held with a thread of cotton. When the butler unties it, 3 sheets appear, thin, rubbed thin at the creases, each one marked in pencil and darkened at the edges by grease. The first sheet is a column of dates running down the left side, month and day, with small initials to the right. Beside some dates there is only a dash. Beside others, a brief word copied the way house talk moves across a room. Complaints. Restless. Weak. Sweats. In one row, the word quiet. Each line has a time written in the same hand, an hour after supper, sometimes a little more. There is no voice here, only pencil marks that make the rhythm visible without argument. The second sheet records portions. It is not a recipe. It names nothing by kind. It lists servings sent from stove to sideboard and back again, first, second, and on some nights, none. The hand that wrote it listens to orders, not to ingredients. In the margin, short notes. Salted, wine poured, coffee late, guests, house alone. The words are observational, drawn from the small phrases that pass between rooms when a bell rings or a hand gestures. Now and then, a sequence is bracketed, the same dish twice, and the same night's complaint appears against the same hour on the first page. The third sheet is the most worn. It gathers remarks as they were spoken in the house and strips them down to their backbone. Too hot. Bring another. The usual. Enough. None of the phrases exceed a handful of letters. Some lines show a single initial, B for butler, M for master, W for wife, before a clipped note like seat changed, window, or keys in view. There a blotches where a thumb carried grease from a plate to the paper, the marks running along the edge like a second set of punctuation. Taken together, the sheets do not instruct, they witness. They match the physician's pages without ever seeing them. When the menu card in the sideboard reads second help, the second sheet shows second. When the parlor book is blank for a Sunday, the margin shows house alone. When a neighbor's table is mentioned by the butler a day later, the first sheet's line reads quiet. The packet is a long pencil answer to the doctor's short ink questions. No name is written in full, but the route is there. Stove to pass, pass to sideboard, sideboard to table, and the intervals that the physician underlined now sit beside the nights when the favored request was spoken. A few entries carry a small cross in the corner where the hand has noted a change that did not move the hours. Windows, keys, boy between. The handwriting does not change size or pace when the family turns inward. It keeps to the same narrow line and the same terms. The butler reads, then folds the sheets again and holds them a moment longer than necessary. He does not ask who wrote them. He knows whose hands carry plates, whose ears are close to orders, and whose work crosses all the rooms where hours are kept. When the packet is retied and set aside, the physician is sent for, and the sheriff informed that paper has been found in the linen. By evening, the inspection stamp from Chapter 9 is placed beside a note scheduling a private questioning in the pantry. The door will be closed, lamps will be set low. The same routine that runs the house will be reduced to names, dates, and what was heard while waiting at the threshold. The packet returns to the table as a guide, not a charge. The sheriff writes a single line across his page, interview domestic, and circles it once. The next chapter begins when Etta stands in the room where she has always stood and answers in plain terms what the papers already say without a voice. The pantry door is closed, the window latched, and the lamp set on the narrow shelf where keys once hung. The sheriff sits with a clerk's paper, leaving a margin wide for his own notes. What follows is not accusation, but repetition. The words are plain, The answer's short. Each one is tied to a ledger that already bears the master's signature. The sheriff's task is only to place them side by side and let the pages speak. Names are given first: the overseer, who signed the ration cuts; the butler, who wrote "No tasting" at stove; the guests, who heard rebukes at table. None of these names come with embellishment. They are delivered as facts, no more. The sheriff copies them into his memo and marks a dash beside each, linking them to dates already entered in the household accounts. Where punishment was spoken aloud, ink exists to confirm it. Dates follow: October, when the kitchen column is halved; June, when summer fever is penciled beside a Sunday entry; November, when new locks are cut and tagged. The household's own books carry those intervals in neat figures, while the physician's daybook matches them with symptoms. Etta repeats them in sequence, not as memory, but as observation. The sheriff sets his pen on each one and circles it once, noting "matches account." Rations withheld are described as they were written: flour, sugar, coffee, cut by fractions. Half ration is not her word, but the overseer's, pressed into the account page. Etta states what was carried to the scullery afterward: scraps, bones boiled twice, casks locked. The sheriff copies only the words that are already on paper. He does not need embellishment. The motive stands in the arithmetic itself. The order to serve while hungry is placed in context. The ledger shows reduced portions. The rota shows Etta's name beside every plate. Combined, the two documents confirm what the pantry already knew. She bore trays she could not taste, under rules she could not bend. The physician's casebook, written without knowledge of either account or rota, underlines the same hour that punishment took its effect. The sheriff's memo states it directly: service compelled under deprivation, domestic exposure traced to household authority. Humiliation is the last subject. It is anchored not in memory alone, but in letters from guests. Two wrote to kin that a servant was singled out in front of company, denied food until plates were cleared. Etta confirms the scene, giving no flourish. Only the table, the order, the silence that followed. The sheriff underlines the phrase "public rebuke" in his summary and adds "witnessed." By the end, his memo is 2 sentences long. The motive is established by the house's own ledgers: rations cut, service enforced, exposure proven. The supporting papers are cited beneath: accounts, rota, casebook, guest letters. No theory is advanced, no confession required. What binds them is control exercised in ink long before the decline began. The packet from the linen stack remains folded on the shelf. The physician's folio sits beside it. The sheriff closes his notebook, initials the margin, and hands the summary to his clerk for copying. Before dawn, word spreads beyond the walls. Neighbors, hearing of the closed-door account, request copies of the memo. Their curiosity is the first tremor of the aftershock that will ripple across the parish in the weeks ahead. The first papers to show the shift are not medical, but commercial. Tailor invoices arrive from town listing ready-made shirts, finished linens, and parlor cloths hemmed. Where households once hired local seamstresses by the week, the line items now read "imported," boxed, with carriage fees attached. On several estate ledgers, a new column appears: dismissal paid, followed by names and brief remarks. Seamstress released. Cook let go. Laundress replaced by outside service. The handwriting is neutral. The totals rise. Fear, when written down, looks like accounting. Bell placements are revised next. A carpenter's bill records cords rerouted, gallery bell removed, and dining pool rehung above sightline. In the margins of 2 household books, floor plans are sketched with small X marks where servants are now to stand. Notations specify no waiting at pantry door, distance at pass, and summons through butler only. The effect is to break the line of service into segments and to put a longer stretch of air between the places where food is prepared and the place where it is eaten. Paper calls this reform. In rooms, it feels like moving a path without moving walls. Keys are copied again. A locksmith's receipt lists a dozen ovals stamped with fresh numbers, duplicates for control, and charges for engraving initials on tags. Butlers write new columns in their books: issue, receive, return, and add the time to each transaction. Wine closets that were already under lock receive second locks for assurance. Larder hooks gain a second bar. The metal tally grows while the number of hands allowed to touch the metal shrinks. The logic is circular and administrative. If the old locks fail to quiet a house, more locks may do the work on paper. In the courthouse corridor, a printed circular goes up on a nail above the stair. The header reads, "On prudence in domestic service." Beneath, in small type over the printer's mark, the committee advises households to revise routines, separate stations, and reduce close attendance upon the table. A paragraph recommends external procurement of victuals and finished cloth where practicable. The wording is careful not to name any house or case. It adopts the tone of public hygiene for what is in truth private panic. By week's end, copies of the circular appear in 3 parishes. By the month's end, most are gone, pulled down, folded and filed away in drawers, or removed to stop discussion before it begins again on the courthouse steps. Letters between families repeat the same phrases: measures taken, habits revised, no cause for alarm. The changes they describe are cosmetic when set beside the records that prompted them. Keys clink in greater number. Bells speak from new angles. Fewer stitches are made in kitchens that once filled evenings with quiet work. Meanwhile, accounts show the cost of avoidance: higher sums to outfit tables from town, carriage charges for items that used to be turned by local hands, and a rise in apothecary slips for those who prefer the scent of camphor to the sound of inquiry. Within the house at the center of the case, the aftershock is smaller and more lasting. The rota stays pinned, but its edges curl. The sideboard drawer holds the same grease-spotted card. The path across the floorboards remains the path Etta wore there, though fewer feet walk it now. The sheriff's 2-sentence memo is copied twice at the neighbor's request and then filed with estate papers. In private, some remove servants they do not suspect and keep those they always have. Others keep lists and believe the lists themselves are control. The physician's correspondence, which had been brisk in the season of letters, thins as policy language spreads. He writes a final note for his own file. Its tone is not corrective, but custodial: the hours, the intervals, the absence of a second case. Beside those points he adds the words "papers retained," and on a separate slip, "to be sealed at family request." When he folds his folio and ties it with twine, the administrative wave has already passed through the parish, leaving behind invoices, duplicate keys, and a blank space where a circular once hung. The next action belongs to the archive, not the dining room. The doctor prepares the bundle for accession and writes the word that will close the case for a time: sealed. The file arrives with a small stack of estate items, wrapped in brown paper and tied twice with twine. A junior clerk in the parish office opens it at a high desk near the window, where afternoon light makes pale squares on the boards. Inside are papers that belong to the case and to no one left to argue them: the physician's folio, the sheriff's stamped sheet, a small bundle of correspondence, and, folded flat between 2 receipts, the pantry rota with names written in a fading hand. The clerk smooths each piece and sets them in order for accession. He works by rule. Each item receives a penciled docket number in the upper corner. Each bundle is described on an accession slip with 3 lines: title, origin, date. The physician's folio opens first. Its ruled columns still carry the hours, the remarks, and the final line drawn at dawn on the night of tests. The clerk copies the heading as he has been taught and notes that the folio includes observations by hour and conclusion regarding domestic pattern. He does not alter the words. He records them as they appear. The letters come next. They are tied with older twine, brittle at the knot. The clerk loosens the bundle and confirms what the index already says: requests for times, replies about windows and room air, phrases underlined without accusation. After supper, not abroad, no second case. He notes, correspondence with colleagues, tone formal, matter unresolved. He copies 2 short phrases into the catalog card because they recur and because the office prefers patterns to opinion. The sheriff's report carries the parish stamp in purple wax and the familiar 3 columns: item, count, remarks. The clerk skims the inventory of pots, plates, and keys and reads the closing paragraph about premises in order and service observed. In the margin, the same word stands underlined 3 times. He writes, on the slip, ins, pection performed, nothing seized, emphasis on routine. He places the stamped sheet beneath the folio where later hands will expect to find it. The rota waits at the edge of the desk until last. It is a single page, rubbed thin where fingers have traced names and hours. The iron tack hole remains in the corner. The clerk lifts it with care and sees the sequence the house once demanded: scullery at dawn, pantry at noon, service at dusk. Etta's name appears beside the crossings that matter: fire to stove, stove to pass, pass to sideboard, sideboard to table. The ink is lighter where it was written and rewritten, darker where oil and soot have pressed the fibers down. No flourish attends the assignments. The paper assumes they were understood. There is no house to return these items to. The building itself is noted elsewhere as removed, its timbers repurposed after the estate sale. The gallery that held Sunday callers is gone. The bell cords have no wall to meet. The locks hang on nothing. The clerk sees only what remains on paper: the times, the lists, the small words copied from rooms where work was done and orders moved. The case that once filled a parish corridor has reduced to a file that will fit in a drawer. He prepares the final arrangement. The rota is placed on top of the physician's folio so that the hour columns and the duty lines face each other. The letters follow, then the sheriff's sheet. He slips an accession card into the front with the docket number, adds the office stamp, oval, black, clean, and ties the stack once more with new twine. The bundle is now a record, not a household. Before he closes the file, the clerk takes a pencil and draws a neat line in the margin of the accession slip. He writes 8 words, small and even, to guide the next person who opens it, then sets the graphite aside and shelves the bundle with the others. No recipe, only H. Abed. If you wish to hear more accounts like this one, mark this record with a like and subscribe so the next will not be lost to time.